Welcome back. Still tuned into Startup Central. Lots more to talk about as we focus in on what's going on with the big push, as the government is planning a big push of manufacturing for new technology devices in India. The Ministry of Electronics will soon come with SOPs in line with the PLI scheme for the manufacturing of mobile phones, and is aimed at capturing a huge anticipated demand for wearables, hearables, as well as IoT and VR devices. To discuss more, let's bring on board and Vishal Gondal, founder and CEO at Goqii. Vishal, thanks so much for joining in. Good to have you on board on Startup Central. So clearly it looks like we are going to see some the chalking out of a new incentive scheme by the Ministry of Technology and Electronics, and this is essentially aimed at capturing the anticipated demand for new tech devices. Your initial thoughts?
I think, when it comes to wearables, it is the low-hanging fruit in manufacturing, because the complexity required for making wearables is much lower than certain other devices. So clearly, it can be manufactured fairly easily in India. The second thing is, and I think I'm glad the government is thinking about IoT and Internet of Health in a big way, because as Indians are adopting wearables and all kinds of devices, the amount of data getting generated from these devices is humongous. And this data has a lot of privacy as well as national security concerns. So I would say that not only manufacturing in India, I think the government will also need to put in regulations or policy around storage of this data in India, as well as how do you use the data generated with these devices. So I think this is not just about manufacturing, but a much more broader play on the sovereignty of data when it comes to India.
Right. And, give us a sense as to what exactly you would like to see in this scheme coming about, because currently India accounts for 3.5% of the global manufacturing. In order to increase that pie, do you think that SOPs in line with the PLI scheme for the manufacturing of phones is the right way to go?
No, absolutely. We have already committed to manufacturing in India. I think the minute PM Modi announced Atmanirbhar Bharat, we were among the first people to embrace it. We are already talking to a few manufacturers, and clearly I would say that this gives us a level playing field, because today if you look at the market, it is flooded by cheap Chinese products which are manufactured, their data, everything is questionable, right? If you look at some of these products which are in the market. And for us to now manufacture in India, we were looking at a scenario where we may actually not be as price competitive, but to be competitive as well as give the highest quality and the highest service, because Goqii is a service model. We are all about helping people become healthier. It is important that the government incentivizes, especially local manufacturers, and I am very happy to see this policy coming up by MeitY.
Enough. I just wanted to understand your view as well then, Vishal, because the potential now for most of these products like wearables, hearables, drones, VR, augmented reality, etc., it's expected to increase to $5 billion over the next 2 to 3 years from the current $2 billion now. Do you think that with these schemes coming in place, it has the potential to even further exceed this? What kind of a number would you look at for the overall market?
See, COVID has accelerated the adoption of health wearables. Everybody wants to know their temperature, their SpO2 levels. So clearly at a consumer level, especially when it comes to health, wearables are playing a big role. And given how India wants to invest in preventive healthcare, I see from just a healthcare perspective, wearable penetration to boom and zoom, because if you look at telehealth, if you look at remote diagnostics, all of that is going to be enabled using wearable devices. So clearly from a healthcare perspective, I can really see massive demand coming up. Clearly, on the other side, when it comes to IoT, you can see already contactless payments. There are so many new things which are coming up. And I think that it will possibly even exceed 5 billion when you look at the consumer adoption, because everybody, I think, who has a smartphone will have a wearable. That's where we will actually go.
Okay, fair enough. And just we've been looking at what this potentially means, and we understand that there's a process of once again calling component makers to really take advantage of this PLI scheme, that the government has invited applications from semiconductor fabs. Do you think that as the ministry has spoken about, officials, that it makes sense now for companies to set up their fabrication units in the country, so that the percentage of manufacturing in the country can potentially increase significantly going forward? And what kind of companies do you believe are likely to show interest in these schemes?
So, just look at the automobile sector, right? In India, automobile sector is booming with manufacturing and the entire ecosystem, because the government had a big role in, giving the whole incentive to the industry as such. Similarly, when it comes to electronics and IoT, I would say that the government needs to incentivize, and there are enough manufacturers, both Indian companies, we know already companies like Tata, etc., are looking at manufacturing options. And similarly, there are certain companies like Foxconn and others who are setting up manufacturing in India. So I would say that the whole world wants to create reliance outside of China from a manufacturing perspective, and India can give them a very, very good base. So I would say that the government needs to create the right ecosystem, because it is not just about one product, right? This entire thing works on ecosystem. You need battery manufacturers, display, chips, battery. There's a whole host of components which go. And eventually, we need to make sure that all these component manufacturers are then available, as well as assemblers in India itself.
Right. I know you spoke of this, shift from China to India, and how the government really needs to create that overall ecosystem. But if you could just elaborate a little bit more, what do you think is the need of the hour in order to ensure that India does have that competitive edge, or can be the alternative to China?
So I would say the need of the hour is not just on manufacturing, but also on data. I would say it's not just about hardware, it's also about where the data is going. So I would say that with the manufacturing, I think Indian government needs to seriously look at usage of data, especially health data, how it is stored, who is doing what analysis on this data. Because today, the challenge, as I said, is not just the device. Remember, all these devices are IoT. They are talking to other devices. They're getting into AI, getting into all of these complex things. So I would say that a much more comprehensive policy around data and manufacturing is required.
Okay, fair enough. And I just wanted to get an insight as to what their outlook is now in terms of the demand that we've seen for some of these wearable companies, the hearables. There's so much potential as well for IoT, as well as VR devices. So what do you believe are some of the key challenges, and what kind of demand and growth do you see that this sector can capture?
So if you look at the segment, right, just like mobile phones, the IoT sector, the wearable sector, even the hearable sector is littered with cheap Chinese products, which are poor quality largely. And like I said, their data policy, etc., is all over the place. So if the government really wants to incentivize local marketing, it is important that we are also price competitive, because the consumer at the end of the day, unfortunately, is not willing to spend more money just because a product is made in India. We are not seeing that happen yet. So for us to be price competitive, it is important that this is done. So I would say that without this, from a long-term perspective, manufacturing in India will become unviable.
You know, Vishal, I just wanted to understand how you've looked at the PLI scheme for manufacturing phones so far. How much of a success do you think it's been that now we're looking at this kind of a model as well, or SOPs rather, in line with this scheme?
So if you really look at the two big companies, one is Samsung and Apple, where the biggest folks who have moved their manufacturing or manufacture a lot of stuff in India. Of course, some Chinese manufacturers have also done that. But I think the key will be when Indian manufacturers or Indian brands, and I know Micromax started that with their device. So we like to see a lot more Indian companies do this. And like I said, at least in the wearable space, Goqii is committed to starting this process fairly soon. So we are hoping that, hopefully with, COVID getting sorted out and, things opening up, by the end of this year, we will have some of our devices actually manufactured in India, which then go by as with our preventive healthcare services.
All right, we'll let you go on that note, Vishal. It's been a pleasure chatting with us, with you. Thanks so much for joining in and giving us a view. Right, go ahead, Vishal.
I think the only one thing I wanted to add was recently the CDSCO, the Ministry of Health, also has gone into getting into approving medical devices, because a lot of these devices, especially on the wearable side, are no longer just fitness trackers. They all have highly clinical data available on them, like blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen, etc. So it is not just about manufacturing, but at a very high-end quality control, because now people are relying on these devices literally for their life and health. So the cry for actually manufacturing this is equally important. And like I said, this is also part of the whole medical device zone, which I know the government is separately looking at.
Fair enough, Vishal. Good having you on board. Many thanks for joining in with that perspective as to what these manufacturing SOPs could mean for the sector.